So my mum and dad, like every young couple, has a goal to make the neat investment of purchasing their first home. But they had found one too in a small rural town in Kansas, a large, to their surprise, newly built house. At the time we moved in, I was fairly young, so obviously I didn't follow the buy process, but after a while my parents explained that the house was pretty oddly priced down. The realtor at the time did explain that the house had a long history before it was built. However, my parents jumped on it. The family that actually owned it previously was still around, and it told my sister too that it was built on an Indian cemetery. There were multiple in the area apparently. Another one was right next to my grandparents' house too. But anyways, here's the weird stuff. So, there were multiple spirits that roamed the house. Activity acted up frequently, and here's a few examples. It all kind of started when my older sister and her friends would scream in fear as pop cans would just start spinning or yoga balls would roll across the room. We believe it was a young boy who roamed about doing little shit things like this. My other sister would yell at my mum to tell me to stop running up and down the stairs, but I would be at a friend's house. I saw the boy a lot too. I would sit in the living room and look at the stairs to only be greeted by a purple apparition of a boy looking back at me. It was pretty terrifying to see him, I must admit. I would build Legos too all the time, and sometimes I would return to them just completely pieced apart. Not only was it scary, but they just kind of pissed me off too. I mean, you never mess with another person's Legos, right? There were also just a ton of more little stories, but I want to get to the ones that I'll never forget. So one night it was kind of stormy, just flashing lightning and some rain. It was about 2 a.m. and I'm watching TV on my couch. My mum was asleep on the other, and I start to hear our 3 dogs outside going just bonkers. They were small dogs, but they were growling like I'd never heard before. I look at my window to see something glowing a faint blue on the ground. I had no idea what the hell it was, but I start to notice humanly features, specifically a rib cage, and then I see a glowing human corpse. I scream for my mum, and she looks and gets my dad, who is also now looking at this mutilated person. They go to contact the police, and I was told to go to their room for now, and after a few minutes they came back and said that it had just disappeared. There are some more stories about this house in town too. I've encountered a lot with family and friends there. True head scratches indeed, but I'll stop here for now, and I hope you enjoyed. I live in FL with my mum most of the time and fly up to WI to live with my dad during school breaks. I'm 18 now and fresh out of high school, and this will probably be my last time to visit my dad's house for a few years in fact. I have an older sister, also in town for a bit, who's been looking for a new hobby and was interested in playing some classic Nintendo games, mainly Zelda. So, May got here about a week ago. I've been sick for almost a month with the flu and mono, so I've just been in bed for a while playing on my Switch, watching YouTube, or doing whatever else I can do. We live in a smallish house, and the basement is roughly the same size as the house too. My entire life, I've never really thought my basement was anything out of the ordinary. But lately, I've been questioning that. But being the irresponsible shit that I am, I'm up late pretty much every night, and I've been just hearing a bunch of creaking and bumping from the basement. I dismiss this as just my house being creaky my entire life, and more so on windy nights too. But then, about an hour ago, I decided to go downstairs and get her old Wii or Xbox or something for my sister. She was at work at the moment, and so I was home alone. And while I was down there, I was hearing just an unusual amount of noise and creaks and whatnot. But for the life of me, I just could not find either system. Of course, I wasn't just looking for the systems. I was also looking through all the old stuff from when we were kids, old toys and books and movies and whatnot, along with old stuff from our late grandfather. He's been gone for a while now, and I don't think his stuff relates to him. But while looking at my dad's workbench, I saw an old toy airsoft revolver, or one from before they had to have the orange tip on them. Long broken, but I picked it up, and while I was looking at it, I saw what looked like a large man out of the corner of my eye. I quickly turned, revolver in hand, to see nothing and nobody there. Okay, that was strange, but I dismissed it and put the thing down. At this point, I also noticed that the various lights around the basement weren't all on in the way that I'd remembered them. But once again, I dismissed it, and finally, while looking around, I looked into an old mirror, and as I did, I was poked in the head by something. And I turned around to see an orange Nerf dart freshly fallen on the floor. At this point, I was obviously spooked, so I hit up my girlfriend to tell her about this. I paced around the basement a few times while texting her everything that happened, and I eventually looped back to the mirror, and this time, I see it. It's a green disc of sorts, and I watch it fly over my shoulder right at me. I ducked off to the side and watched it hit the mirror and then just disappear behind the old bins. At that point, I casually walk up the stairs with that feeling of just something behind me. I close the door and I decide to forget about the we for now. This happened about 7 years ago. I was 16 years old at the time and was home alone with my only younger sister, Nadine, who was 9 at the time. Our only parent was my mum, and she worked a full-time graveyard shift, 10 to 7, and we had easily become accustomed to it because we usually would be asleep or at school whenever she was working. Every night was the same: get home from school, homework, shower, say goodbye to my mum, and then go to sleep. Often, me and my sister would stay up late despite my mother's orders, but nothing crazy pretty much ever happened. We lived in an upstairs 2-bedroom apartment. At night, me and Nadine would barricade ourselves in our mother's room, lock the door, and go to sleep. We were always too scared to sleep in separate rooms. Our mother had the key to every door in the apartment. This specific night, me and Nadine were in the living room watching yet another Family Guy episode. It was getting late, close to midnight, and we definitely had school the next day, so it was time for bed. As we were preparing for bed, someone knocked on the front door of the apartment. Now, this apartment complex had 2 doors, one metal door on the outside and then the door made of wood which was technically inside. Therefore, one would have to unlock 2 doors before they could get to it. I looked at Nadine as if to say, "Is Mum home early?" I put my ear to the door, and then they knocked again. "Who is it?" I said through the door. No response. I ordered Nadine to call Mum, but there was no answer, so I looked through the peephole and I couldn't see anything. It was dark, and whoever it was wasn't tall enough to see, even a silhouette. Nadine went to unlock the door, and I yelled, "Stop." My mum always told me that she would call for an emergency, and she has the keys to the apartment, so she would have no reason to knock. Before I could come up with a plan, though, whoever was on the other side of the door began pounding on the door. They were no longer knocking, and it sounded like someone was banging on the door with a closed fist. As if on cue, Nadine and I ran to my mother's room and locked the door. Nadine began to cry. I tried to console her, but I was honestly scared too. I waited a few moments in hopes that they would go away or my mum would call to yell at us to open the door or something. About 2 minutes passed and my mother called us back. She saw that we called her and took a break as soon as she could call, because she was at work. I told her about the knocking and she urged us not to exaggerate, but whoever it was gone for now and we were okay. She blamed it on perhaps a lone drunk or someone looking for trouble or something. Regardless, though, she said, "Do not open the door." She hung up and then we just got into bed. I was tossing and turning, and it had been about an hour since the knocking first began when suddenly there were 3 bangs. Nadine and I shot up because the knocking was now at our bedroom door. There were no lights on in the apartment, which spooked me further, because who was in our home that wouldn't turn them on? I called my mum. She answered on the first ring, and I nearly yelled at her, "Mum, they're knocking at the bedroom door." I was in tears, beyond scared. Nadine had hid in the closet, and while my mum was on the phone, they pounded on the door again, and I extended my arm out with the phone in hand so that she could hear. The pounding was so intense that I felt like at any moment now they would break through the lock on the door and rush in. She called 911 and came home that night straight away. And when she reached the front door, both doors were locked. The officers searched the home for any signs of entry, which wasn't likely since we were on the upstairs level, and nothing was ever found. Nadine and I still talk about this stuff sometimes because if it hadn't have happened to both of us, I don't think anyone would have ever believed us. Because I know that I sure wouldn't believe it.